Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more notable names in African American history. Before we jump into this, I do want to let y'all know I have two ways to donate. I have a coffee account, which allows you to donate smaller one time payments if you wish to go in that route. Or I have a Patreon, which will allow you to go month to month, which both will be in the description box below the video. But if let me go ahead and say this: if you are in financial straits, do not donate. Pay your bills, take care of things. Life is hard enough for everybody at this point. But if you can afford it, if it won't hurt you in any way, and you want to donate, then go ahead. I would greatly appreciate it. It's me, myself, and I that makes these videos, so yeah. But with that said, let's jump back into the video here. Today we are looking at Crispus Attucks. This man is notable in American history for being one of the individuals to die at the Boston Massacre. He was right there at the beginning of the revolution. Sailor of African and Native ancestry, who died in Boston on March the 5th, 1770, after British soldiers fired 2 musket balls into his chest. His death and that of 4 other men at the hands of the British soldiers became known as the Boston Massacre. And it changed him from a rather anonymous sailor into a martyr for a revolutionary cause. You'll usually see there's a famous image of the Boston Massacre. The links I've got open didn't have them for some reason. Let me go ahead and pull this down here. Look this up. Boston Massacre. I'm sure you all have seen it. It's the one most people think of when they hear Boston Massacre. It's the one I'm familiar with. Image. Yeah, right there it is. There it is. That's the image most people think of when they see the Boston Massacre. The British just firing on the crowd, who themselves weren't carrying guns. It was sticks and stones, rocks, bottles. And the British eventually opened fire, and is what is often considered to have started the revolution. But anyway, the life of Crispus Attucks is far less documented than his death, where he is one of the original men to fall after being massacred by British soldiers. I think there were 5, they said, altogether. Yeah, and 4 other men. So five total at Boston Massacre. He was one of 5 men that kind of signaled the revolution. Coverage and investigations into the details of the massacre refer to Attucks as Michael Johnson, a name he may have used as an intentional alias. After uncovering his actual name, newspapers published a few details about his life, notably his profession as a sailor, his birth in Framingham, Massachusetts, his current residence of New Providence in the Bahamas, and his ship's destination of North Carolina. His last name, Attucks, is a native name deriving from the Natick word for deer. Witness testimony during the massacre trial interchangeably used mulatto or Indian to describe Attucks, since he had mixed heritage of African and Native American. His first name reflects the trend of the colonial era of enslavers forcing an ancient Roman name onto their enslaved people. And Attucks shares the name Crispus with the son of Emperor Constantine. He also appears in a 1750 advertisement in the Boston Gazette. William Brown of Framingham placed an advertisement to call for the return of a 27-year-old escaped enslaved man named Crispus, described as a 6'2" mulatto. Contemporary sources at the time of his death do not identify Attucks as enslaved or formerly enslaved. How and when he gained his freedom is unknown, but it is possible that Attucks used the name Michael Johnson to protect himself from a return to slavery. So apparently he was at one point a slave. And you notice, of Framingham, of Massachusetts, like I said, slavery was in both the North and the South at this period. It would disappear soon from the North. Because it was just disappearing. There's no need for this use of owning slaves. And many northern states would be outlawing it eventually. It would still exist in the South for a while, as we know, and it would take a war to end that. But on March the 5th, 1770, witnesses placed Attucks at the head of a group of sailors brandishing clubs and marching toward King Street. A crowd formed around a small group of British soldiers, hurling snowballs, ice balls, and insults at the men. Observers noted Attucks leaned his tall frame on a hardwood club or a cordwood club. Amid the chaos, Private Montgomery and the rest of the soldiers fired into the crowd. 2 musket balls ripped through Attucks' chest, killing him instantly. In the following days, the people of Boston held a funeral procession for the victims of the massacre. And because Attucks and fellow victim and sailor James Caldwell had no family or home in Boston, their bodies lay in state at Faneuil Hall. Defending the soldiers in the subsequent trial, John Adams painted Attucks and the rest of those killed as aggressors to justify the killing. He played on the jury's prejudices about race and class, describing those in the crowd as a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish Jack Tars. In other words, those in the crowd were young, lower class, black, Irish, or sailors from out of town. Adams' argument led to an acquittal for the captain and all but 2 of the soldiers. Yeah. Now Irish are just seen as part of the white diaspora. But for a long time, other countries weren't even seen as white. If you had heritage from another country, you weren't seen as white. Oh, it's the Irish. Italian. No, you aren't white. That's how they were treated. Along with Native American, African American, mulatto. Yeah. Hatred, unfortunately, has a lot of roots in America. The racist hatred. Town officials buried the victims of the massacre in the Granary Burying Ground. Today they share a headstone facing toward Tremont Street. In the 1800s, abolitionists in Boston, led by William Cooper Neal, held up the death of Attucks as the first martyr of the American Revolution. His seminal work, The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution, fought the erasure of black people from the story of the American Revolution. Nell led his work with the story of Crispus Attucks, highlighting the death as the first in the cause of liberty. Though black Bostonians have commemorated the anniversary of Attucks' death since at least the 1850s, it took until the early 20th century when activists, including William Monroe Trotter, pushed the city of Boston to finally recognize March 5th as Crispus Attucks Day, a tradition which continues to the present day. Yeah. A man we know little about, but was there from the beginning of the revolution, who, honestly, it was his and the death of 4 other men who started the revolution. Yeah, see, from Britannica, what we just read was the National Park Service. From Britannica, Crispus Attucks was born maybe 1723 and died March the 5th, 1770, because, again, his death is well documented, the Boston Massacre. American hero, martyr of the Boston Massacre. Life prior to the day of his death still shrouded in mystery. Although nothing is known definitively about his ancestry, his father is thought to be Prince Younger, a slave who was brought to America, while his mother is thought to be Nancy Attucks, a Native American. In the Boston Gazette on October 2nd, 1750, William Brown, resident of Framingham, Massachusetts, advertised for the recovery of a slave named Crispus, though it's spelled a little differently. Crispus is how Brown had it, or it ended up being presented, which is usually thought to be the same man, the Crispus Attucks that was killed in the Boston Massacre, Crispus. Said that he had run away and described him as a 27-year-old, 6'2". In the 20 years between his escape from slavery and his death at the hands of British soldiers, Attucks probably spent a good deal of time aboard whaling ships. So yeah. And remember, the Boston Massacre, we're not at war yet. But there's grievances. And it's another one that just bubbles forth the need for an American Revolution. Because remember, our independence isn't officially declared until 1776. And we don't even start fighting a war until, I think, 1775, the year before. So, yeah, 1770, all these grievances are just building, boiling to a breaking point. Attucks' life prior to the day of his death is still shrouded in mystery, although nothing is known definitively about his ancestry. We already talked about that. Okay. Attucks probably spent a good deal of time aboard whaling ships. All that is definitely known about him concerns the Boston Massacre. A crowd of colonists gathered and began taunting a small group of British soldiers. You know, you can imagine the soldiers who are keeping you from doing certain things, because there's already been acts done. Stamp Act, the Townsend Acts. Yeah. But the Boston Massacre is a turning point. We already see colonists, the forefathers of America, getting angry. They don't like tax collectors. There have been outbreaks of little violence here and there. But this is an event that reshapes how many look at Britain. Uh, Tension mounted rapidly, and when one of the soldiers was struck, the others fired their muskets, killing 3 of the Americans instantly and mortally wounding 2 others. Attucks was the first to fall, thus becoming one of the first men to lose his life in the cause of American independence. His body was carried to Faneuil Hall, where it lay and stayed until March the 8th, when all 5 victims were buried in a common grave. Attucks was the only victim of the Boston Massacre whose name was widely remembered. In 1888, the Crispus Attucks Monument was unveiled in Boston Common. But yeah. And then we have from battlefields.org. Thank you. Yeah, circa 1723 is his birth. And of course, his death is the Boston Massacre. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his book Why We Can't Wait, wrote about the inspired life of Crispus Attucks, saying he is one of the most important figures in African American history, not for what he did or for his own race, but for what he did for all oppressed people everywhere. He is a reminder that the African American heritage is not only African, but American, and it is a heritage that begins with the beginning of America. So yeah. Was a sailor, mixed heritage. Yeah, like I'd already mentioned, tensions that erupted in 1765 after the Stamp Act, and Britain said, we're sending troops to occupy Boston because this seems to be where most of the problems are. The lone sentry of the custom house was attacked by a vociferous mob who threw stones, snowballs, chunks of ice, and wood at the sentinel. Fearing for his life, he called for reinforcements from a nearby garrison for assistance. Captain Thomas Preston and 7 soldiers joined the sentry at the custom house. And that's the soldiers that the crowd would be assailing with objects. The crowd only grew larger and threw chunks of ice and clubs at the soldiers. One found its mark and knocked a British soldier to the ground. He stood back up, yelled, and fired his musket into the crowd. Immediately, all other British soldiers opened fire in a ragged volley. 5 men immediately fell dead. The first among them was Attucks with 2 musket balls in his chest. So yeah. All 5 were buried together in a common grave in Boston's old granary burying ground. In the 19th century, he became a symbol of the abolitionist movement, and his image and story were seen and told to demonstrate his patriotic virtues. So yeah, the 19th century, which is the 1800s, still pushing to end slavery. Crispus Attucks was shown. He is a big part of freedom. Abolitionists like William C. Nell and Frederick Douglass extolled Crispus Attucks as the first martyr in the cause of American liberty and used his memory to garner support to end slavery in America and attain equal rights for African Americans. In the 20th century, Attucks continued to be celebrated as a major African American historical figure. Musician Stevie Wonder wrote a song during the American Revolution Bicentennial, 1976, that mentioned Crispus Attucks, and commemorative postage stamp was also issued in his honor. Though little is known about his life, his death is still something that is deeply remembered, especially for its role on the way to American independence. So yeah. And just a quick check over on Wikipedia. Sailor, whaler, and stevedore. Waterfoot manual labor who loads and unloads ships. Okay. Most disagree on whether he was actually free or an escaped slave, but they do agree that he was of Wampanoag or Natick ancestry and African descent. Let's see. Born in Framingham, but lately belonged to New Providence. And was here in order to go for North Carolina to deliver stuff, yeah. As he was a sailor. Would be an icon of the anti-slavery movement. He was born a slave of Deacon William Brown. But that's from histories written between 1847 and 1887. So it's even unclear if Brown was the original owner. But we do know in 1750, Brown posted in the Framingham Gazette or Boston Gazette that, yeah, Crispus has run, yeah. Let's see. At the time of the massacre, this is from a participant in the Boston Tea Party, George R.T. Hughes. Attucks was a Nantucket Indian belonging on board a whale ship of Mr. Folger's, then in the harbor, and he remembers a distinct war whoop which he yelled. The mob whistling, screaming, and sounding like an Indian yell. So, Uh, he's described as African American in popular culture, as the term mulatto is just rarely used anymore today. Unlike the 18th century, when everyone with African ancestry is considered black. Um, in 1770, two major sources of eyewitness testimony about the massacre did not refer to Attucks as black or as Negro, but rather as a mulatto and an Indian. So he was more considered Native American than African American. And in an account from Philadelphia's Pennsylvania Gazette, the man who may have been Attucks was referred to as Mulatto Man, named Crispus. So, yeah. Let's see. Historians differ in opinion on his heritage. Some assert his family had intermarried with African slaves, while others maintain he had no African heritage. It is widely acknowledged, though, that Attucks had considerable Native American heritage. So there is question, but I think most people kind of see him as a mix of Native American and African American. Uh, See, his last name Attucks is the word for deer. They say here in Wikipedia it's Narragansett, while what was it, National Park Service or Britannica, it said it was of a different native tongue. They say Natick word, so interesting. Also noted a possible connection to a probable Natick woman and possibly Attucks' mother or relative named Nanny Peter Attucks, who is described as a Negro woman in the 1747 estate inventory of Framingham slaveholder Joseph Buckminster, and along with Jader Peter Attucks as possible descendant of John Attuck, the Indian in an 1847 history of Framingham. So, there are two possible ways he had the name Attuck. Interesting. A lot of this is supposition, though, because again, we know so little about his life before the massacre. Yeah. fall of 1768, British troops were sent to Boston to maintain order for growing colonial unrest, which had led to separate attacks on local officials following the introduction of the Stamp Act, which I mentioned, and the subsequent Townshend Acts. Again, I mentioned. Radical Whigs had coordinated waterfront mobs against the authorities, and the presence of troops, instead of reducing tensions, further inflamed them. And this came to a head with the Boston Massacre, March 5th, 1770. And this kind of stilled the want for independence. There had been calls before, but that was kind of the moment that said, yeah, we want independence. Okay, they got up here the names in the coffins, who must have been the ones who were killed. Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, Crispus Attucks. You can see the coffins that are drawn with the initials on top. There should have been a fifth. I'm trying to read through the old school paper and see if I can find it. I can't seem to see mention of the fifth offhand, though. Yeah. The soldiers would be put on trial for murder, and all of them would be found not guilty except for two. Two were found guilty of manslaughter and pled the benefit of clergy and were instead branded on their thumbs. In his arguments, Adams called the crowd a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish jack tars. Common English term for seamen of the Merchant Navy or Royal Navy during the British Empire. Okay. The Irish Teagues was an Anglicization of the Irish language. Male name Teg, used as ethnic slurs for a stage Irishman. Like I said, people don't realize how much hate is built into American history and its foundation. In particular, he charged Attucks with having undertaken to be the hero of the night and with having participated in a precipitated a conflict by his mad behavior. The event would be named by a cousin to John Adams, the man who a beer is named after, Sam Adams. He would name it the Boston Massacre 2 years later and help ensure it would not be forgotten as an event that led to the revolution. Now, there's the tombstone that commemorates the 5 men killed in the Boston Massacre. Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, Crispus Attucks, and Patrick Carr was the 5th. Boston has Crispus Attucks Day because let's see what else we have. The places where Attucks and Samuel Gray fell were marked by circles on the pavement, and within each circle a hub with spokes leads out to form a wheel. In 1888, a monument honoring Attucks and the other victims was erected in Boston Common, and it is over 25 feet high and about 10 feet wide. Yeah, there's a picture of it. The bas relief, the raised portion on the face of the main part of the monument, portrays the Boston Massacre with Attucks lying in the foreground. Yeah. Under the scene is the date March 5th, the date of the massacre, 1770, and above the bas relief stands a female figure, Free America, holding the broken chain of oppression in her right hand, and beneath her right foot she crushes the royal crown of England. At the left is a figure of an eagle. The 13 stars are cut out of one of the faces of the monument, or cut into one of the faces of the monument, and beneath these stars in raised letters are the names of the 5 men who died that day. There's middle school named Crispus Attucks Middle School in Houston, Texas. Let's see. He, in 1940, was honored with one of 33 dioramas at the American Negro Exposition in Chicago. He received a coin, was featured on a silver dollar coin on the observe side when they released the Black Revolutionary War Patriot silver dollar in 1998. He's listed as one of the 100 great Americans by scholar Molefe Kete Asante. We done mentioned the middle school in Texas, but he's got a number of different places named for him. Crispus Attucks High School in Indianapolis, Indiana. Attucks High School in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Crispus Attucks Elementary School in Kansas City, Missouri. Attucks Middle School in Dania Beach, Florida. And the Attucks Theater in Norfolk, Virginia. the Crispus Attucks Association in York, Pennsylvania, the Crispus Attucks Road in Spring Valley, New York, Crispus Attucks Elementary School in Bedford Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, New York, Crispus Attucks Park in Carbondale, Illinois, Crispus Attucks Elementary School in East St. Louis, Illinois, Crispus Attucks Park in Washington, D.C., Crispus Attucks Center in Dorchester, Massachusetts, Crispus Attucks Place in Roxbury, Boston, Massachusetts, and Crispus Attucks Bridge in Framingham, Massachusetts. Popular culture. Yeah, the first man to die for the flag we now hold high was a black man, which was a line in the song by Stevie Wonder, Black Man, which talks about Crispus Attucks. We done mentioned this in the bicentennial, 1976. Crispus Attucks was the first blasted, is a line from Nas's 2008 song, You Can't Stop Us Now. Crispus Attucks, the first blasted. The poet John Boyle O'Reilly wrote the following poem when the monument was finally unveiled. And to honor Crispus Attucks, who was the leader and voice that day, the first to defy, the first to die with maverick car in gray. Call it riot or revolution or mob or crowd as you may, such deaths have been seeds of nations, such lives shall be honored for A or I. Melvin Tolson begins his poem Dark Symphony with the lines, Black Crispus Attucks taught us how to die before white Patrick Henry's bugle breath uttered the vertical transmitting cry, yea, give me liberty or give me death. MLK we done talked about that. In the successful sitcom The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Will Smith names Crispus Attucks as one of the many inspirational African American figures in history and tries to explain why, when he tries to explain why he's spelling history. 2012, Wayne Brady, J.B. Smoove, and Michael Kenneth Williams, as well as Keith David, appeared in a satirical rap music video about Crispus Attucks. In the Netflix series Luke Cage, there is a housing development called Crispus Attucks Complex, named after Attucks, where Cage also explains Attucks' role in the Boston Massacre in the end of the second episode of the series. And Spike Lee's 2020 film, Da 5 Bloods, refers to Crispus Attucks. But yeah. So much information for a man we know so little about. But yeah. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. Thank you all for watching. As always, I couldn't remember how my end starts. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. It can't just be random blog post or some tinfoil hat wearing website. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.